All right, good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Kristen. She's from Eastern Washington, and she's struggled with an opioid addiction for the last 8 years. She was a successful, highly competitive swimmer when she was injured, and she was prescribed some opioids. It has led to a heroin addiction, which has led to her having 4 stints in rehab, losing her kids' custody, and numerous job firings. Her addiction has torn her family apart, and it's not solved. And she's a family that's close to me as well as many in Eastern Washington, and she's my district director's sister. They need help, and they need hope. For families like Kristen's, the People's House is taking more comprehensive steps this week to address this growing opioid crisis all across America. And we are focused on increasing our understanding as to how we prevent addiction, protect our communities, crack down on the foreign shipments of fentanyl from places like Mexico and China. As this issue is hitting home to me in Eastern Washington, it is all across the country. Nationwide, 116 people die every day from opioid-related deaths. Law enforcement and first responders have raised the alarm as to the access of fentanyl. Just a few milligrams can be fatal. The amount of fentanyl that would be found on the ear of Lincoln on the penny can be deathly. So keeping fentanyl off the streets is saving lives. I encourage everyone to visit opioidcrisis.gop. There you can find a comprehensive list of all of the legislation that we are working on. These are stories from different people, different hometowns, different walks of life, but they all have in common the tragedy that is many families are enduring across this country. We are united in doing everything that we can to help these families. So now I'd like to turn it over to the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, who has really led the effort on this, Chairman Greg Walden from Oregon.
Well, thank you, Kathy, very much. We're here today because, as you heard, the opioid epidemic continues to ravage and destroy lives all across America. In my own state, we lose more people to overdose from opioids every year than we do in traffic accidents. I remember being in the radio business every Monday morning. You'd read the story about how many people died in traffic accidents. There isn't a story published about how many people showed up at the ER and died from an overdose or carted away from their homes and families. Yet we know it happens. At the Energy and Commerce Committee, we've spent the last year and a half working on legislation and working on the investigations. You all are familiar with that. The culmination of our work has been brought to the floor this week with the first of 57 pieces of legislation out of our committee alone, virtually all of which are bipartisan or unanimous. Just this past January, Amanda, whose picture I have here today, was seeking relief from pain surrounding her mental illness. Tragically, she ended up dying from a fentanyl overdose. Her father came before our committee and bravely shared his family's story. He hoped that their loss would help spur Congress to modernize federal laws. Sadly, Amanda's story, as you'll hear today, is not unique. All of us know someone, directly or indirectly, affected by this crisis. Truly, it is the crisis next door. My colleagues here today each have similar stories from their districts, and we will have them speak about those. It's for the people in these photos that we rallied around bipartisan legislation. It's for their families, for their friends, for the future of our country. The ones left behind in their heartbreak, they expect us to act, and we are. We will not rest until we have won this fight against the opioid addiction. While this crisis looms large before us, I believe that we as a Congress and we as the American people are clearly up to this task. We passed the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act and the 21st Century Cures Act last Congress under Fred Upton's leadership. And earlier this year, we passed an historic $4 billion investment to combat this crisis and this crisis alone, the biggest federal investment ever. And now, over the next 2 weeks, we will advance numerous additional measures to address this ever-evolving epidemic. In fact, House Energy and Commerce Committees reported 57 bills to the floor. But let me be clear. While these bills are not our first efforts in this fight, you have my word they will not be our last either. We know there will be more work to do, even after these become law. We have an opportunity to save lives, like Amanda's, in the future. And we have a responsibility to our families, our friends, and our communities, and a nation to lift people out of addiction and to get America on a better path. With that,
Kathy, you want to run the cue?
I think next is Tim, you want to go? And then
I thank the chairman for his efforts on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And this is a picture of Jesse Grubb. Tells a story that shouldn't have happened. Jesse's law was passed yesterday on the floor of the House. Jesse was a recovering addict. She had come to Michigan, was making it, both in education and the workforce, and preparing for a marathon. Had an injury, subsequently had a surgery. That surgery dealt with a infection as well. A port was put in her body. She and her parents both informed the surgeons and the doctoral staff at the hospital that she was a recovering addict, and so opioids shouldn't be part of her therapy. Sadly, didn't make it to the discharging physician, and he discharged her with 50 oxycodone pills. As she went home, the next night overdosed, and Jessie Grubb is no longer with us. But her story goes on, and it's a story that speaks to the reason why we're doing what we're doing, to make sure this doesn't happen again. And we have people that successfully beat the addiction, can go on and have stories that speak of a future. And so I'm thankful that this bill passed, worked closely with my good friend and colleague on the other side of the aisle, Debbie Dingell. And we hope Jesse's law becomes a law of hope and safety and security for other generations.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Andy Barr from Kentucky, and my home state of Kentucky suffers from the third highest opioid mortality rate in the country. So many of these stories are stories of tragedy. This is a story of hope, and this is Roger with his two kids. Roger arrived at Shepherd's House Recovery Program in Lexington, Kentucky on May 1st, 2015 after making parole. When Roger arrived, he was hopeless. All of his belongings fit into a single garbage bag. He was unemployed, unemployable. He had not seen his kids in 2.5 years, and his family had given up on him. Roger told the people at Shepherd's House he didn't know how to be responsible anymore, how to pay his bills, show up on time, stay out of jail, and most importantly, he had no idea how to stay sober. But Shepherd's House helped him change that perspective. And through a housing program, a long-term transitional housing program, he learned how to build a support network that would teach him how to be a father, and soon he was back visiting with his children on the weekends. Eventually, Shepherd's House allowed Roger to find freedom that he was never able to obtain before. He was able to get his own apartment for the first time, have bills in his own name, and most importantly, Roger stayed sober. And he's now the program director of an intensive outpatient program for Shepherd's House, helping the very type of people that Roger once was. So we are very happy that this week the House of Representatives will be voting on our bill, the Thrive Act, Transitional Housing for Recovery in Viable Environments Act. This legislation will provide housing choice vouchers to programs like Shepherd's House and provide hope for long-term addiction recovery.
Thank you. Lou Barletta, Pennsylvania. This is a picture of Braden Schleer and his mother. Braden was born addicted, released from the hospital, back to his mother, who was still an addict. Protective services were not notified, and at 6 weeks old, Braden was in bed with his mother, who was high on 3 different opioids, and Braden's mother had rolled over on top of him and suffocated him to death. This case led to a national investigation as to the federal dollars that are going to the states to make sure that hospitals and doctors are reporting to federal agencies, 2 agencies, protective services, before a baby is released. We found that only 9 states were actually using that money as they should, which led to a bill that I had passed, holding the federal government accountable to hold the states accountable, to hold hospitals accountable, so other children like Braden do not lose their lives.
Quick, Eric Paulson from Minnesota's 3rd District. I'm carrying with me a photo of Keegan Duffy, a Minnesotan who unfortunately was addicted and died of an overdose. He was a successful master's student who became a professional computer engineer, and like many Minnesota families, succumbed to addiction. And it's a tragedy that can be avoided. After he had chronic back pain, his doctor prescribed him 120 pills for back pain, which led to his addiction. And I'm thankful that through our actions and bipartisan work, we will pass solutions that will help many families like Keegan's, unfortunately, avoid this tragedy in the future.
Hello, Susan Brooks from Indiana 5. I'm holding a picture of Aaron Sims, a young athlete who also had an injury, who got addicted to opioids and who died of an overdose. But what's amazing about him is his mother, Justin Phillips, started an organization called Lifeline, Overdose Lifeline. And it raises funds to try to ensure that first responders and others, including family members, have Narcan, have that naloxone, that life-saving medication to stop the overdose. And in Indiana, we passed what was called Aaron's Law, named on behalf of Aaron Sims, because we need to make sure that we provide that Narcan and all of that hope for the families and for those who are addicted to prevent that overdose.
Hello, I'm Buddy Carter from Georgia, currently the only pharmacist serving in Congress. I have a unique perspective on this particular situation, having practiced pharmacy for over 30 years. I saw this epidemic evolve. I saw it evolve over years. I've seen the impact that it's had. I've seen lives ruined. I've seen careers ruined, families ruined, and I know the impact that this can have. I want to applaud Chairman Walden and the committee for the work that they've done on this particular subject, because it is important. I've always described it as being two different components. One is, how do we control the drugs? How do we control the number of pills, the prescriptions? But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, is what do we do to help those 2.5 million people out there who are addicted? I'm here to tell you today, if you're within the sound of my voice and you have an addiction problem, reach out to your physician, reach out to your pharmacist, to your friend, to your family member, and tell them, I want to get better. I need help. We need you, and we want you to get better. This legislation, parts of this legislation are going to do just that. They're out there to help you get over that addiction, and that's what we want to do. Again, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hi, I'm Vicki Hartzler from Missouri's 4th District. I want to introduce you to Samantha Huntley. She was a beautiful girl, straight-A student, cheerleader, and she was in a car accident when she was 16 years old, broke her back in 3 places. As a result, she was put on prescription painkillers, and sadly, after that, a friend introduced her to heroin to continue to try to address the pain. She overdosed, and now her mom is alone and doesn't have anyone to celebrate Mother's Day with. And I applaud her mother, Julie Ozanan Gideon, for participating in over 7 high school assemblies that I held this spring, challenging young people to choose to live to be drug-free and warning them of the problems. And I truly believe that this week is a historic week in our nation's history, where we as members of Congress from both sides of the aisle are coming together saying no more. It's a tragedy in 2016 when we lose more Americans to addiction, overdose, than died during the entire Vietnam War. This is an opportunity, a turning point in our nation where we are rallying together. We are passing over 60 bills that will address all aspects of this problem. And I feel confident that as we continue to work together in the future, we will look back to this week and we'll say, we made a difference, things have changed, lives are being saved because of what we're doing here.
Good morning. I want to thank all of my colleagues who are sharing these stories. Both their stories and others are too often occurring in our country. I want to talk a little bit about Kemper from Slidell, Louisiana. Kemper's mom was addicted to opioids. She had gotten in a car accident, started getting prescribed drugs, and eventually became an addict while she was pregnant for Kemper. When Kemper was born, he was born addicted to drugs. It's a syndrome called NAS. Unfortunately, according to the Centers for Disease Control, about once every 25 minutes, a baby is born addicted to opioids, NAS. That's how serious this epidemic is. Fortunately, Kemper was able to beat the odds, and now he's 3 years old and he's very healthy. But there are too many stories like this happening across our country, and that's why it's so important that this package of bills to address this opioid crisis all across our country is so important to saving lives and will be effective once it's carried out. Obviously, there's a few other things going on this week. Speaker, I'm sure we'll get into a lot more detail, but we've been having very productive meetings with a number of our members on solving the immigration problem in this country. We've been working very closely with the Trump administration, and clearly our objectives are to get a bill that first secures the border, to fund the wall that President Trump campaigned so actively on and built such a core around, and then also to address so many of the other problems, the interior border security problems, closing loopholes, addressing chain migration and the visa lottery. Look, when you talk to Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen, she will tell you that right now, if somebody who comes to this country illegally and then commits a felony, after they serve their time for committing a felony, if she wants to send them back to the country that they came here illegally from, she, in many cases, has to pick up the phone and call and ask that country for permission to take them back. And you might be surprised to find out that in many cases, those countries say, no, thank you. We don't want the felon back in our country. And so because of current law and rulings by the courts, she has to just let those people go. We need to close those loopholes, and that's what we do in this bill. And we also solve the DACA problem. And so I'm really glad that our colleagues have come together to work in a way that addresses this problem. Finally, I want to commend President Trump for his leadership on the world stage. The historic meetings that we saw between the president and North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, is so incredibly meaningful to finally get us to a place where we can actually see a denuclearized North Korea. Just think about that. Imagine how important that would be, not only for our allies in South Korea, Japan, others throughout the peninsula, but what that would then mean to isolating Iran and what we could do to finally denuclearize some of these dangerous countries. So obviously there are a lot more details to work out, but the fact that you saw the North Korean leader agree to denuclearize in a verifiable way is an incredible achievement, and I commend President Trump, our former colleague on House Energy and Commerce Committee, Mike Pompeo, who's doing a great job as Secretary of State, and his entire team.
As you can see by all the members and all the pictures, there's not one place in America that this does not touch. More than 100 people will die today. Tomorrow the same. Our friends, our family, some of the brightest stars that we've had, unbeknownst to them, became addicted simply because they got injured. This is not the first time we have dealt with the subject. As you can tell, it's personal to so many members in Congress. In the last Congress, we passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act and the 21st Century Cures. And we added, as the chairman said, $4 billion in the omnibus for funding. We are spending this week and next week passing more than 70 bills dealing with this addiction. This is not the first step, and it's not the last step. It is simply the next step. This is destroying the fiber of this nation. And we should battle it in the seriousness of what it is. That's why you will find the work that not just one committee, but numerous committees of every different element of what we're challenged to do. And our commitment to the American public that we will not stop until we're able to deal with every ability of this addiction. America deserves better, and families need to be protected. That's what our goal is, that's what our mission, and that's what we will accomplish.
You've heard some stories here today. Let me give you a number. 115 lives lost every day in America. Addiction can feel all-consuming. It can seem impossible to live out your true purpose, but it does not lower the inherent value of a human life. Every life has meaning, and no drug can take that away. All of us can offer our compassion to one another so that people struggling feel that they have a place to turn. That is also something we're tackling here today. Look, This is Michelle Jaskolski. It's a really good Wisconsin name. This is Michelle and one of her sons. She's got 2 sons, former high school athletes. Yet, as the case is so often, they became addicted to prescription painkillers from injuries, and then later, heroin. They are alive. They are clean now. But it was a long road there, and Michelle still worries. Yes, you all know, sobriety it's very fragile. Friends and relatives facing addiction, they don't fully recover. It takes a long time. The one thing that strikes me about how she describes dealing with her son's addiction, it's the pervasive loneliness. She says that she felt like no one else was dealing with her same struggle. She felt disconnected from her friends. She felt disconnected from her parents, from her faith. It goes to show that this can be such an isolating battle, not just as one struggling with drug use, but for those trying to figure out how they can be there for their loved ones, mothers taking care of their sons. But there is hope that came out of Michelle's family struggle. Michelle has made it her mission to help families like hers struggle. It's her mission to help families like hers get through the wilderness of drug addiction and the difficult road to recovery. She has been a tireless advocate for more resources to prevent and treat addiction. Congress has heard that call too. We are taking action to tackle this opioid epidemic. Among other things, these bills will stem the flow of opioids into our country. They change the way opioids are prescribed and encourage non-opioid treatments. And they crack down on deadly synthetic drugs like fentanyl. And then they strengthen resources, prevention, and treatment, including establishing more comprehensive recovery centers. We've learned a whole lot about this problem in a short period of time. In fact, the recovery community, the community that Michelle now helps uphold, is one of the most resilient. This is what she is doing now with her life, making sure that other families don't fall into the trap that hers did. We should applaud that model of support. Our institutions should emulate and encourage this kind of fellowship. And those overcoming addiction and those supporting them, this is where I see America at its strongest. People coming together to help each other through these difficult times, getting rid of the isolation, and then having a multi-pronged approach to tackle this opioid crisis. This is all about restoring hope. It's about lifting up communities, and it's about, hopefully, saving lives. Questions? Chad.
This agreement, this tentative agreement, to bring these immigration bills to the floor next week, it's unclear, what the bills will actually look like here if they were passed. But wasn't this just an effort to say it again? Wasn't it an effort to obviously forestall the discharge petition so that you wouldn't imperil the farm bill? The farm bill went down because this issue on immigration wasn't resolved in your conference.
This is an effort to bring our caucus together, our conference together on immigration. I'm very pleased with our members. What happened was our members got together, spoke with one another, and compromised with each other so that we could find a way forward without exercising a discharge petition, which would mean we would never make law. And so now what we have is an actual chance at making law in solving this problem. And members wanted to have votes on their issues. There are members who want to have a vote on the Goulet-McCall bill. They're going to get that. And then we now have a bill that represents a compromise that is going to be brought to the floor so members can actually vote on legislation tackling this issue, and this has a chance of going into law. Because like I said before, last thing I want to do is bring a bill out of here that I know the president won't support. Well, we've been working hand in glove with the administration on this to make sure that we're bringing a bill that represents the president's 4 pillars so that we can come together, have the votes that everybody's looking for, but more importantly, this represents a consensus between our members so we can move forward on the immigration issue. I think it's a product of good compromise by our members, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Because of that,
The discharge petition was the time sensitivity we had. Casey.
Second on opioids, if you're willing. But first on...
Yeah, I was... Thank you.
I do have a political question first, though, sir. South Carolina voters told Mark Sanford to take a hike last night. Is that because he opposed the president?
I can't speak to it. I'd ask Mark Sanford and the South Carolina voters. It was a very close election. Some of our members have lost primaries. That's just what happens in contested primaries. Every cycle people lose primaries. That happens. What was your opioid question?
How much responsibility do pharmaceutical companies bear for this crisis?
Look, I'd ask some of the members who are on the committee, maybe the chairman wants to chime in on this, but I think there's a responsibility to go all around on this. Look, you're discharging people coming out of the hospital with 120, Vicodin, with kids coming out with wisdom teeth, with 3 weeks worth of this prescription. It's also, we need to come up with non-opioid pain management treatments. Non-opioid treatments is the key here. So there's a lot of responsibility to be shared. Greg, you want to add to that at all? Did he? Oh, Buddy, go ahead. Did he leave? Oh, sorry.
You know, one thing's for sure about the opioid epidemic, and that is that there's enough blame to go around for everyone. Certainly the pharmaceutical manufacturers have a responsibility here, and they understand that. Drug distributors, wholesalers have a responsibility. Pharmacists, physicians, everyone shares in that responsibility. The DEA has a responsibility. You know, why did it take us so long to schedule hydrocodone and APAP as a Schedule II drug? That's a question that needs to be asked. It wasn't scheduled as a Schedule II drug until 2014. So there's a lot of blame to go around, but the package of bills that are out there, you know, there's no one solution to this, and that's one thing that you have to keep in mind. But speaking specifically to the pharmaceutical manufacturers, I have been on them because there's a gap between what you can prescribe, like ibuprofen and acetaminophen, and then there's a big gap, and then you go to the opioids. Now, the opioids are a great class of medications. They do what they're supposed to do, but they're highly addictive. So the pharmaceutical manufacturers have been calling on them to fill in that gap. Give us an option of something, and we've been talking about non-medication treatments and non-opioid treatments. That's the type of thing that we need to encourage, and we need to be really pushing the pharmaceutical manufacturers and medicine in general to do.
Babe.
That's coming out. You're proud of your members. You're working together. But the Freedom Caucus has not said they're going to back this bill. None of them.
Look, I'm not going to ask any member to back a bill they haven't seen yet, but our members have been participating in negotiations to come up with a proposal, but we had to put legislation in front of people. That's what a final vote determines on. But we have a process that all of our members have agreed to, which brings these bills to the floor. And that means we don't do a discharge petition and we bring these bills to the floor. Members are going to reserve judgment on a final vote on a piece of legislation until and after they've read that legislation. I would expect that of any member.
Last question. Do you view Kim Jong-un as a great guy who just wants to do right by his people and no longer poses a threat to the United States?
Look, the status quo was not working with North Korea. What was the status quo with North Korea? They were racing toward a nuclear weapon. They were racing toward having multiple independent ICBMs with nuclear-tipped warheads on top of them. The president needed to disrupt the status quo, and the president has disrupted the status quo. He should be applauded for doing that. And we should be under no delusion of our experiences with North Korea. It's a terrible regime. They've done terrible things, and they've been deceitful in the past. But it's really important that we disrupted this status quo like the president has. I'm encouraged by the negotiations that are now taking place between Secretary Pompeo and the North Koreans. The path we were on was not working. Prior administrations have failed to fix this. And so it's really important that we dealt with this issue as it was, because it wasn't going to get any better. The president should be applauded for disrupting the status quo. Now, let's go get an agreement. And we should be under no delusion that this is going to be fast. This is going to take time. And we have to make sure that we have irreversible, comprehensive denuclearization of North Korea. So that's what we need to get out of this. I'm pleased the president has gotten us to the position we are in. Time will tell how this ends. Thank you very much.